everyone, and welcome to one of our first ever book interview reviews. I'm delighted this morning to be joined by Sheree Atcheson, DE&I leader and author of this brand new book, Demanding More. Sheree, congratulations on the book.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's the first time I've seen somebody holding it up that isn't me as well. That's so exciting.
There it is, and it's fantastic. I'm kind of a midway through, but I'm not going to give too much away because obviously we want to cover it off in the interview. So first of all, for everyone who's kind of listening who may not know you, in which case, why don't you know Sheree? You must know her. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Yes, so I am Sheree Atcheson, and I've been a global diversity, equity and inclusion leader for almost a decade. I started my career as a software engineer and then pivoted into senior DE&I leadership, really helping organizations with a diversity and inclusion strategy that was very data driven. I've been doing this for so long now, I almost can't remember when I wasn't doing it, but the work that I've done has been across lots of different organizations, industries and global remits. And through that work, I'm also an advisory board member at Women Who Code, which is the world's largest nonprofit globally dedicated to women in tech. I'm a Forbes contributor, and then now I've just written Demanding More through last year, which was definitely a unique experience.
So what compelled you to write the book?
I guess for me, I like to take, it's why I write quite a lot in the industry as well. If there's anything useful in this head of mine, I like to share it wider than just my own head, because I feel like if I am a single point of failure, then what's the purpose here? Because I obviously won't exist forever, and the knowledge I have is useful now, so let's share it. And one of the things that's really important to me in inclusion work is that we talk about exclusion, but we talk about what has happened to bring us to this situation right now. And one of the things I didn't like was that a lot of books and thought leadership and so on really started on moving forward into inclusion without really respecting and understanding what's happened in the past through people's decisions. And when the publisher reached out about Demanding More, I felt like it was a really great opportunity to really share, the historic changes that have brought us to this position, and then talk about meaningful ways to move forward that you can do when you when you read it, you can go and do it. When you finish the book, you have a backpack of different things that works for you and will work for the industry. And I guess that the real goal of it was to pass on some meaningful action-based initiatives and insights to people that hopefully will help create systemic change.
I agree with you. You get lots of these kind of books and they're just talking about the strategy and throwing lots of stats at you, but they don't give you that practical toolkit that kind of enables you to do something today. So, that's one aspect of it I absolutely love. So you interviewed quite a lot of people for the book, me included. But if you could take me out of the equation on this question, was there any kind of shocking moments? Was there anything divulged within those interviews that kind of gave you a bit of a wow moment or provoke your thinking around something else?
Yeah, I think when I reached out to all of the people that I wanted to interview, you included, it was because I knew those people had been doing things differently. I knew those people were thinking about things in a way that had made real meaningful change, but also had done it in a very vulnerable and open way. And that's something that really aligns to, I guess, myself. I'm very vulnerable and very open. And whenever I was doing the interviews with yourself, with Anne Boden, who's the CEO of Starling, with Brian Reeves, who's the Chief Diversity Officer at Dell, and a whole host of other people, the vulnerability piece was something that I thought was incredibly insightful, because people were very openly sharing the shortcomings that they had around inclusion and how they fixed those. And one of the things that was really eye-opening for me was I did an interview with Kate Robertson, who's the co-founder and CEO of One Young World, which is the world's largest organization dedicated to youth leadership. It's described as the youth version of Davos, which is phenomenal. And she was raised in apartheid South Africa, and she talks very openly about being a white woman, being raised by racist parents, and how she's had to really deprogram herself, how she had to separate that thinking, and when she moved away, really challenging the ingrained views that her parents passed on to her, to make sure that, one, she wasn't being actively racist, but also that the organization that was for global youth empowerment was for all global youth, not just white folks. And I think that that level of openness for me was just astounding, because sometimes I think we we maybe don't share as much of that difficult stuff, that difficult journey that all of us have probably been on in different ways. And then that means that people also can't learn from it. And I think when we have leaders that are willing to share those different things, I think it can make such a big difference. And that I always remember that moment when she shared that on the video call, because I could see what it meant to her to share that, because it is a really personal thing.
Yeah, I can imagine. What a story. So, I mean, what do you think the biggest thing that faces companies at the moment in terms of inclusion? I mean, we've come from quite a hard spot last year where I had a lot of conversations with people where they're like, well, budget's a bit been put on hold. And, you know, and even with the conference that we've got coming up, I wanted to do a panel called How We Accelerated D&I Efforts During the Pandemic. And no one had anyone to offer up for that panel because there was no acceleration. If anything, it was the reverse of that. So, I mean, what do you think? What's the big hurdles that companies face if they're ever going to be inclusive?
I think one of the biggest hurdles is viewing inclusion as something that you can cut. For example, like we've seen at the start of the global pandemic through LinkedIn data that DE&I roles were statistically cut quite a lot whenever redundancy rounds started to happen and so on. And then we also seen in the summer after the murder of George Floyd, those same roles having a significant uptick in being announced and organizations hiring them. Now, what that's telling me is that organizations have viewed this as something that you can flip-flop on, that you can say it's not important now, it is important now, it's not, it is, it's not. And that when you see that, you see budgets being cut, you see things being moved around. And what we need people to understand is that the DE&I work, especially the equity and inclusion piece, is a part of your business. It is a part of the business strategy. And that means it doesn't just sit in a people remit far down the ranks. It actually sits in senior leadership. It helps define the business goals. It feeds into the products you may be creating or the things that you're selling ultimately. And that's where it's really important to evolve that thinking. And until we evolve that thinking, we're going to continue to see tokenistic efforts, but also, like you've mentioned, when we have an opportunity to accelerate, we're going to decelerate instead. And we simply just can't keep doing it.
Yeah. So you mentioned obviously the George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. You know, we saw a lot of grand statements last year. Everyone was kind of full of it, you know, quick to put out their kind of statements and their press releases. You actually think we've seen much traction off the back of that? Because I thought people might be a little bit slow to respond, but we're kind of, you know, we're coming up a few months off a year now.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we did see, and you touched on it yourself, was we've seen a lot of public statements, a lot of, you know, we stand with George Floyd, we stand with the Black Lives Matter movements and so on. But we also seen that a lot of that fizzled out a few months after. And one of the things that's important here when we consider actually what are we trying to do is what are we trying to do? Are you trying to show solidarity in that moment, or are you trying to show solidarity tying that into systemic change? Now, one of the things that I do think has been the catalyst from all of that tragic event and the other murders and deaths that have happened to Black folks, specifically in America especially, is the transparency piece around data, because society has pushed a lot of big organizations that haven't been willing to share the granularity of the data, for example, breaking down their people of color data to actually highlight Black statistics and so on, has pushed them to do that now. And we have seen that happening with quite a lot of, you know, big fours and so on doing that. But what we need now is actually, okay, great, you've shared the data is not good, we knew it wasn't going to be good, what are you going to do next? And what that means is that brings us back to the point around the investment piece. Are you going to invest in this long term, or are you going to share the same stats again in a few months whenever it's a year later? And I think that's what we're hoping that people will continue to do. I do see some organizations that are absolutely embedding this and moving forward with purpose. But we also still see quite a lot of tokenistic stuff as well.
I think we see that around a lot of stuff, not to put a pessimistic view on it. So let's talk about gender for a second. So, for example, you know, there's lots of different success stories that are bounded around where, you know, we've now got, there's a woman on every 350 board, etc. But what about the intersectionality of those women? You know, we have to go beyond the question around, is there women in the room, to actually, what are the different facets of those women, you know, and how do they represent? So What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, and I talk about this a lot, and I've been talking about it for years, because what we've almost done in many ways has created another element of exclusion. We've done an inclusion that's just enough to make sure that, you know, we're including, for the most part, white, heterosexual, financially privileged, non-disabled women. For the most part, that's what we've done. Because we haven't had taken nuance and intersectionality into consideration. The other big part here, and again, this is why data is so important, because if you only capture, let's say, gender data, then those statistics look great, because you're like, okay, 30% of our leadership team are women, okay. But actually, if you were capturing gender and ethnicity, even just those two, you could do that cross-section, that intersectional analysis, and actually see maybe we're not doing so good when it comes to an ethnicity perspective, disability perspective, so on and so forth. And what I want us to do is that applaud the success that we have had so far, applaud it, because it is notable and it is incredibly important, but to not rest on those laurels of, okay, we've met the 30% target, we're 50%, we have one woman on the board, etc., but push ourselves to do more. And that was why, I guess, with the book, and why it's like demanding more, it's forceful, it's quite brash probably, but that's why, because I just feel like we see a lot of organizations and even society as a whole sort of sitting back and being more comfortable with that, as opposed to, okay, this is great, but what else do we need to do? Because we do need to start on continuing to really embed that kind of thinking down in all of our inclusion work.
Now, it's interesting that you use the term brash. I wouldn't call you brash, I'd call you forthright in your thinking, but you do seem to look at D&I in a slightly different lens. And again, you and I have discussed, maybe that's a generational lens, I'm not sure, but it's refreshing. And you know, how can we call our work exciting? But it is because it's slightly new age. Where does that kind of different level of thinking come from?
I do think that there's some elements of a generational insight and difference, because there's been great work done by the people that have came before me, and I obviously am able to take the learnings, the successes, the things that have missed the mark, embed that into my thinking, and then try something new. And that's the whole purpose here of it. And I know you talk about this quite a lot too. It's about, you know, what's next, because, you know, there will be people after me as well that will do this differently, and that's what we need. And I think from my perspective, my approach is slightly different than before, because firstly, I take a very data-driven lens, but also I am very forthright, as you describe it, about what's happening, and very transparent. And I know one of the biggest pitfalls of the DE&I work in industry prior to sort of the last few years has been that it's been really siloed and really opaque. Like, people aren't seeing what's happening. Data is not really sharing the honest picture, whereas I don't do it that way. I am incredibly open and transparent with the data, because that embeds accountability. That embeds societal accountability and internal accountability. And that's why I think there's that evolution that changes it. And I guess when you do that kind of work, and it is exciting because you're doing something that will create an impact bigger than just yourself. And I think, you know, people after me are going to do it in even more amazing ways. And I can't wait to see what they do too.
Yeah. So it's always about the legacy we leave behind, right? And all of it picks up things kind of along the way. So, for example, for someone buying, demanding more, if they're not in a D&I position, and perhaps they're part of a startup, and we've said the book's full of kind of practical tips, but, you know, why is it particularly useful for them? Because we don't just want to target the companies that are already doing this stuff, right? We want to raise awareness outside. So what's your thoughts?
Yeah, of course. So I guess firstly, when I decided to write Demanding More, the reason that I wanted to write it, and I use everything is explained, it starts from the ground and then works its way to where it needs to be. But I wanted to have a book that, regardless of what your level of expertise was, your background, your insights, that it would still be meaningful for you. I always said that I wanted it to be a book that even like my dad could pick up and read and get something from, even though obviously he's not in the business world, he's not doing any of that stuff, but he would still get something useful from it. And from a startup perspective, what demanding more gives you is a good, strong baseline to start with. It gives you that insight into, what should you do now? Because you're probably quite small, budget is probably quite tight. You probably don't have someone like me in a role to own DE&I. So it will sit with probably your CEO or your chief operating officer or someone like that. This will give you some things that you can do to do meaningful things as you scale and then as you invest further. And the big thing with that is that it means that it takes out the element of having to potentially roll out something and fail fast. You don't need to do that when I'm telling you that this is what is best practices and this is what works around listening, around data, around reporting, around initiatives, around frameworks and so on. And it goes into that level of detail of, how to create, for example, a really strong code of conduct, how to create a psychologically safe grievance process, how to roll out a sponsorship framework that works, and all of the different things that takes, I guess, the guesswork out. And I think that's why it can be really useful for startups too, because it's telling you exactly what you need to know.
But also, I think for individuals to buy it and rock up to their own internal departments, if they don't have an ED&I head, and say, look, we need to get some of this stuff right from the outset. So I think that's really important. I look at startups and I think, God, they've got a real opportunity here to build better, than what we've done, and to learn the lessons of the big giants, if you like, that, have got these cultures that are incredibly difficult to move. So if you was to pick a couple of things out the book, the key points of some of the things that people could do or take in their organization, what would they be? Just one or two.
Yeah, so I think the first one is how important listening is. When we don't listen, we make a lot of assumptions, and assumptions are biased. Your assumptions are biased, my assumptions are biased. And the core part of any of the work that I do, and it's threaded throughout every part of that book, is that we have to listen to people, and then we have to do something meaningful. And that's the second point. There is no point in listening if you don't do something with it, because otherwise people share very open, vulnerable things, even if that's just sharing their employee data to you. If you don't do something with it, they're not going to continue to engage with you. Think about that from any aspect. Nobody wants to talk to a brick wall. So that's the point, is the listen is key, and the action, the follow-up is key. And those are the two things I think that, there are common threads throughout the entire book, because I would really like the world to keep and push to make strategies that don't work only for the people that are creating them, that don't only work for the people that I may directly identify with, but actually work for everybody that it needs to work for, because otherwise I'm just adding to the problem. Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. So where can we get the book? Obviously, I'm privileged. I got a copy, right?
You did indeed. You can get it on Goodreads. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it direct from the publisher, which is Kogan Page. If you go onto the publisher website and use Demanding More, you'll get 20% off as well. So you can get it literally everywhere you want to get it, where your heart's content. Special offer.
And obviously, Sheree, I love following you on Twitter. It's like, I think it, you say it, which I love. Again, very, very refreshing, very honest, very transparent. Tell everyone your Twitter handles so they can give you a follow.
Yes, so I am at Nirushika, Nirushika.
Wonderful. Sheree, it's been an absolute joy. And one quick question before we go. Is there going to be a book too?
Oh God, who knows? I've only just got past writing this one, but maybe. I said to my husband, I was like, oh, we'll have my book launch coming up soon in April. He was like, your first book launch, and I was like, he knows.
Yeah, I like him. He's a huge. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm a huge fan of your work, and we love what you do at We Are the City and We Are Tech Women. It's been great to talk to you. I wish you every best of luck and celebrations for the book launch day. And as I've said to all of you, go and buy this book. It's incredible. It's packed full of tips and hints. And again, once you've read it, take it off to your HR departments and pop it on the desk. I never remember once there was a book and I left it on all of my senior leadership teams. It was called Women in Business, I think. It was Aviva Wittenberg Cox, and I left it on every single desk of my leadership team, which they thought was very cheeky. So there's my challenge to all of you to do the same. Buy the book, leave it on people's desks. I will let you go. Sheree, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Vanessa.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.